500 Templar knights versus 26,000 Muslim warriors. That's the story you've heard. That's the miracle of Montgisard. Except there's a problem. There were only 80 Templars, not 500. 80. So who actually won one of history's most impossible victories? A 16-year-old boy whose hands were wrapped in bandages, whose body was being eaten alive by leprosy, and who had just recovered from malaria. His name was Baldwin IV, and the real story is so much better than the myth. November 25th, 1177. The Kingdom of Jerusalem is dying, not from external enemies, though those are everywhere, from internal collapse. King Amalric I, strong and capable, died of dysentery 3 years earlier. His successor is his son Baldwin, a brilliant boy, a tragic boy, because Baldwin has leprosy. The disease was discovered when he was 9 years old. His tutor, William of Tyre, noticed something disturbing during rough play. The other, boys would pinch Baldwin's right arm hard enough to bruise. Baldwin never flinched. He felt nothing. That numbness was the first symptom. By 1177, at age 16, Baldwin can still ride. He can still fight. But he has to be strapped to his horse because he's losing sensation in his legs. His hands are bandaged. Parts of his face are beginning to show lesions. He's dying. Everyone knows it, and that creates a catastrophic political problem. Because a leper cannot marry, cannot produce heirs, the succession will pass to his sisters, making their marriages the most important political question in the kingdom. Factions are forming. The court is splitting. And in the middle of this chaos, the greatest Muslim commander of the age is about to invade. His name is Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. You know him as Saladin. Saladin in 1177 is not yet the wise, weary statesman who will negotiate with Richard the Lionheart. He's younger, more aggressive, more arrogant. He's recently accomplished something extraordinary. He abolished the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt and seized Damascus. For the first time in decades, the Muslim Near East is unifying under one ruler. The Kingdom of Jerusalem is now surrounded. Egypt to the south, Syria to the east. Saladin needs a victory against the Crusaders to cement his legitimacy, to prove he's the true champion of jihad, to silence his rivals in Aleppo and Mosul who view him as a Kurdish upstart. So in early November 1177, he crosses the border with an army of approximately 26,000 men. Not a raiding party, an invasion. His target is the coastal city of Ascalon, the key fortress guarding the road to Jerusalem, and he has good intelligence. The main Crusader army is in the north with Count Philip of Flanders. The southern frontier is stripped bare. All that stands between Saladin and Jerusalem is a dying teenager. Baldwin IV issues the Arriere ban. It's an emergency summons. Every able-bodied Christian male in the southern kingdom is called to arms. He rides south with whatever forces he can scrape together. Fewer than 400 knights, maybe 3,000 infantry. It's not enough to fight Saladin in the open, but it's enough to hold Ascalon. Baldwin enters the city just hours before Saladin's vanguard arrives. Saladin looks at the walls of Ascalon and smiles. He's done it. He's bottled up the king, trapped the entire southern army inside a fortress. With the king neutralized, nothing stands between Saladin and Jerusalem. So Saladin makes a decision that will cost him everything. He disperses his army. He leaves a small screening force to watch Ascalon. Then he breaks his 26,000 men into raiding parties. They fan out across the countryside like locusts. They burn Ramla. They sack Lydda. They terrorize the villages. The main body, along with the enormous baggage train, moves slowly north toward Jerusalem. Confident, unopposed, Saladin has violated the most fundamental principle of warfare, concentration of force. His army is no longer a cohesive fighting unit. It's a sprawling mob of looters spread across 50 miles of territory, and Baldwin is about to make him pay for it. Inside Ascalon, the young king is planning. He sends a messenger to Gaza, 12 miles south. The fortress is held by 80 Knights Templar under Grand Master Odo de Saint-Amand. The message is simple: abandon the fortress. Join me. Odo makes the decision immediately. The Templars are a standing army. They drill constantly. Their rule forbids panic or retreat without orders. They are the only professional soldiers in the Latin East. And right now, their king needs them. The 80 Templars execute a nighttime breakout. They slip through the Ayyubid lines, using their knowledge of local wadis and goat paths. They enter Ascalon. Now Baldwin has approximately 455 heavy cavalry, 375 secular knights and 80 Templars, plus around 3,000 infantry, spearmen, crossbowmen, Turcopoles, the local light cavalry. It's still vastly outnumbered by Saladin's dispersed forces. But Baldwin doesn't care about numbers anymore, because he's not going to stay in Ascalon. He's going to attack. The decision is audacious to the point of madness. If Saladin catches them in the open, they'll be annihilated. But Baldwin has one advantage Saladin doesn't know about: local knowledge. One of his commanders is Baldwin of Ibelin, not the king. A different Baldwin, a baron who's fighting on his own lands. He knows every wadi, every creek, every hillock, every marshy patch, and he knows where Saladin's army will be vulnerable. The Crusaders march out of Ascalon at night. They hug the coast, moving fast. Then they turn inland, tracing an arc that will bring them onto Saladin's flank. They're gambling everything. If scouts spot them, if the dispersed Ayyubid forces recombine, it's over. But Saladin has made a catastrophic intelligence failure. He posted no scouts watching Ascalon. He assumed the king was trapped. Why would you watch a cage? November brings the first rains to the Levant. The wadis, dry riverbeds for most of the year, are turning to mud. On November 25th, Saladin's main body is near Gaza, an ancient biblical city on a ridge overlooking the coastal plain. His baggage train, hundreds of wagons loaded with siege engines and plunder, is crossing a wadi. The wagons get stuck in the mud. The crossing becomes a traffic jam. The army strings out. Units are separated by the obstacle. The light cavalry can't maneuver in the marsh. Saladin is near the rear of the column, personally overseeing the crossing. That's when the scouts arrive, screaming. The Frankish army is not in Ascalon. It's here. It's deployed in battle formation, and it's charging. If you're enjoying this story of one of history's most impossible victories, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to break down exactly how a force of 4,000 defeated an army of 26,000. And the tactics are absolutely brutal. The shock is total. Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani, Saladin's personal secretary and chronicler, will later write that the army was in complete disarray. Men are scrambling to find their armor in the baggage wagons, trying to mount horses, trying to form lines. But before any of that happens, there's a moment on the Crusader side that changes everything. King Baldwin IV calls for the Bishop of Bethlehem. The bishop raises a wooden reliquary. Inside is a fragment of the true cross, the actual cross on which Christ was crucified, or so they believe. In the 12th century, this relic is not a symbolic object. It is the literal presence of God on the battlefield. Baldwin, strapped to his horse, asks to be helped down, or in some accounts, he dismounts himself, using just his knees to control the animal because his hands have limited function. He kneels in the mud. His body is already ravaged by leprosy. Lesions on his face, bandages on his hands, nerve damage stealing sensation from his limbs. He's 16 years old, and he prostrates himself before the cross and weeps. William of Tyre, who was there, records the scene. The king rose to his feet to cheers from his men. The soldiers are watching their king, a boy their age, suffering from a disease that marks him as cursed in the eyes of many, refusing to hide, refusing to abdicate, begging God for victory. It transforms them. Fear becomes religious ecstasy. Desperation becomes holy fury. The infantry forms a protective screen. The 455 heavy cavalry form up in the center. And at the tip of that formation are the 80 Templars. Let's talk about what makes a Templar knight different from a regular knight. These are not feudal levies who train a few weeks a year. The Templars are a standing army. They live together in fortress monasteries. They drill constantly. They follow a military rule that forbids retreat without explicit orders from their commander. In a cavalry charge, they form a formation called a conroy, knee to knee, shoulder to shoulder, a kinetic battering ram of horseflesh and steel. Their standard, the Beauseant, a black and white banner, flies at the front. The secular knights rally around it. The Templar discipline anchors the entire line. Each knight rides a destrier, a warhorse bred for aggression and impact. 1,500 pounds of muscle trained to bite and kick enemy soldiers. The knight wears double mail, 2 layers of interlocking iron rings. At close range, Turkish arrows cannot penetrate it, and the weapon is a 12-foot lance made of ash wood, couched under the arm. The combined momentum of horse and rider channeled into a steel point. When 455 of these units accelerate from a trot to a gallop and hit a stationary or disorganized enemy, the physics are simple. They're unstoppable. The charge begins. The Crusaders don't probe, don't skirmish. They commit everything. The heavy cavalry accelerates, hooves churning mud. The ground shakes. Across the Wadi, the Ayyubid army is in chaos. Some units are still stuck behind the baggage train. Others are forming hasty lines. The light cavalry, the Turkic horse archers who usually dominate through mobility and harassment, are trapped in the marsh. They can't maneuver, can't retreat. The Templars hit first. The 80 knights smash into the Ayyubid center like a steel wedge. Lances punch through leather armor and quilted cloth. Horses trample men into the mud. The secular knights follow, pouring through the gap the Templars create. The impact is so violent that the Ayyubid front line simply ceases to exist. But Saladin's Mamluk Guard, his elite troops, they're made of sterner stuff. These are professional soldiers, armored in lamella plates and mail. They form around Saladin's yellow standard and fight back. One man stands out, Taqi ad-Din, Saladin's nephew, a warrior of legendary skill. He sees the Templars cutting a path toward his uncle. He leads his own squadron in a countercharge. His son, Ahmad, fights beside him. The two forces collide in the center of the Wadi. It's not a clean cavalry charge anymore. It's a grinding melee. Swords against swords, maces against shields. Ahmad falls, killed before his father's eyes. Taqi ad-Din keeps fighting. He's buying time, seconds, minutes, anything to let Saladin escape. Because the battle is already lost. The ferocity of the Frankish assault is beyond anything Saladin anticipated. These men believe they're fighting for God. Their king, a visible martyr, is somewhere in the chaos, still fighting despite his disease. The true cross is behind them. Failure means not just death, but damnation. The Ayyubid troops, dispersed for days, poorly coordinated, backed against a wadi. They can't cross quickly, begin to break. First one unit roots, then another. Then panic becomes contagious. Saladin sees it happening. His army is disintegrating. He makes the decision. He's going to run. He abandons the yellow standard, abandons his Mamluk guard still fighting to protect him, abandons his dignity. According to the chronicler Ralph de Desato, Saladin doesn't even flee on a horse. He mounts a racing camel. Camels can traverse muddy and sandy terrain better than horses. They have greater endurance. And this particular camel is fast. Saladin sheds his armor to lighten the weight and rides. The Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the man who unified the Muslim Near East, flees the battlefield on a camel while his army is slaughtered behind him. The Crusaders pursue until nightfall, 12 miles to the mound of Tel el-Hesi. They kill every Ayyubid soldier they can catch, but they're exhausted, they're few, and darkness is falling. The organized pursuit stops, but the killing doesn't, because nature is about to finish what the Templars started. A severe winter storm strikes the region. For 10 days, freezing rain and hail lash the Levant. The fleeing Ayyubid soldiers abandoned their baggage train at Montgisard. All their tents, their food, their warm clothes. They're retreating through the desert in light tunics, soaking wet, starving. Thousands die of hypothermia. And then the Bedouins arrive. The Bedouin tribes are technically Saladin's subjects, but they don't care about political loyalty. They care about survival, and they see an opportunity. Scattered Ayyubid soldiers, weaponless, freezing, stumbling through the desert. Easy prey, the Bedouins attack stragglers, strip them of anything valuable, kill them for their horses. By the time the survivors stagger back to Cairo, the butcher's bill is staggering. Approximately 90% of the invasion force is gone. Of the 26,000 who marched out, only a few thousand return. Saladin reaches Cairo on December 8th with, in his own words, only a tenth of his army. The greatest Muslim commander of the age has just suffered the worst defeat of his career at the hands of a 16-year-old leper. Let's talk about the Crusader losses, because this wasn't a bloodless victory. Roger de Moulins, Grand Master of the Hospitallers, reported 1,100 Christians killed and 750 wounded. For a small kingdom, those are devastating casualties. But they traded 1,000 men for the destruction of an empire's army. They traded blood for a decade of survival, and they did it with a total force of around 4,000, not 500. So where does the myth come from? How did 80 Templars become 500? It's a compound distortion, a game of medieval telephone. William of Tyre, writing as Baldwin's tutor and chancellor, emphasized the 455 cavalry, 375 secular knights, plus 80 Templars. Over centuries, that number got conflated. The total cavalry became attributed solely to the Templars. The infantry, the majority of the force, simply vanished from the story. Then the Templar mystique kicked in. After the order was suppressed in 1307, conspiracy theories exploded. Freemasonry claimed false Templar lineage. Romantic novels portrayed them as mystic warriors. By the 19th century, paintings depicted Montgisard as a Templar miracle. The internet amplified the myth through endless repetition. And here's the thing, the myth is compelling. 500 monks with red crosses versus impossible odds. It's a great story, but the truth is better, because the real hero wasn't a Templar Grand Master. It was a dying child. Baldwin IV built a monastery on the battlefield, dedicated to St. Catherine of Alexandria, because the battle fell on her feast day, November 25th. It was his victory to commemorate. The political impact was immediate. The domestic critics who questioned whether a leper could rule were silenced. Baldwin had proven himself in the most definitive way possible, but Saladin learned from Montgisard. He never again underestimated the Franks. He reformed his army, tightened his intelligence network, and waited. He struck back in 1179 at the Battle of Marj Ayun, his first major victory over Baldwin. Days later, he besieged and destroyed Jacob's Ford, a massive Crusader fortress the kingdom had been building on the Jordan River. 700 Templars and workers died. 800 were captured. The castle had stood for only 11 months, perhaps the shortest lifespan of any fortress in history. But Montgisard had bought the kingdom of Jerusalem approximately 10 years of survival, a decade where the kingdom could have stabilized, could have prepared for the inevitable. It didn't. The tragedy of Baldwin IV is that his body betrayed him faster than his enemies could. By 1182, he was blind. He couldn't walk, He had to be carried on a litter. He died in 1185. 24 years old, he left no competent heir. The succession went to his sister Sibylla's husband, Guy of Lusignan, a man described by contemporaries as weak and indecisive. The kingdom fractured into factions. The unity Baldwin had maintained through force of will evaporated. On July 4th, 1187, Saladin lured Guy into a trap at the Horns of Hattin. The Crusader army was destroyed. The True Cross was captured. Jerusalem fell 3 months later. Everything Baldwin fought for, everything he delayed with his broken body and brilliant mind, gone within 2 years of his death. Saladin used the same principles against the Franks at Hattin that the Franks used against him at Montgisard. Terrain manipulation, catching the enemy dispersed and exhausted, exploiting overconfidence. He learned from his defeat, and he never forgot the leper king who humiliated him. So what's the real lesson of Montgisard? It's not about Templar, warrior monks performing miracles. It's about what happens when you underestimate your enemy. Saladin looked at Baldwin IV and saw a cripple, a boy, an invalid to be brushed aside. He dispersed his army because he couldn't imagine that invalid would dare to attack. He posted no scouts because he assumed the king was trapped. He allowed his baggage train to slow his army at a river crossing because he had all the time in the world. Every decision flowed from the same cognitive bias, the inability to respect the capability of a disabled adversary, and it cost him 90% of his invasion force. Baldwin, meanwhile, made every decision a competent commander would make. He concentrated his forces. He achieved strategic surprise. He exploited terrain. He led from the front. The fact that he did all this while recovering from malaria, while his hands were wrapped in bandages, while leprosy was eating him alive, makes it more impressive, not less. Here's what we know for certain from the primary sources. 80 Templars participated. William of Tyre records this explicitly. Approximately 375 secular knights rode with Baldwin. William of Tyre again. A significant infantry force was present. We know this because Roger de Moulins reported 1,850 casualties. A cavalry force of 455 cannot suffer that many losses. Saladin's army was dispersed for foraging when the attack came. Multiple sources confirm this. Baldwin IV personally commanded and fought. Both Latin and Muslim chroniclers agree. Approximately 90% of the Ayyubid force was destroyed through combat, exposure, and Bedouin attacks during the retreat. Saladin escaped on a racing camel. This detail appears in Ralph de Deceto's chronicle. Those are facts. The scholarly consensus estimates the total Crusader force at 3,000 to 4,500. The Ayyubid force at 12,000 to 20,000. The 26,000 figure from William of Tyre is considered exaggerated, but even the conservative estimates give Saladin a 3-to-1 advantage, maybe 4-to-1. That's still an impressive victory. It doesn't need exaggeration. The authentic history is more dramatic than the myth. Consider what actually happened. A 16-year-old king suffering from an incurable disease rode out from a besieged city with fewer than 500 knights. He conscripted every able-bodied man he could find. He coordinated a breakout from another besieged fortress. He shadowed an army potentially 4 times larger. He maneuvered it onto marshy ground where its mobility advantage disappeared. He raised the True Cross before his men, prostrated himself in prayer, then led the charge personally. He annihilated 90% of the enemy army. Saladin fled on a camel. The leper king built a monastery on the battlefield. Then, over 8 years, Baldwin watched his body decay. He negotiated truces when too sick to fight, led armies when he could still ride, and finally died blind and paralyzed at 24, having delayed the inevitable for a decade through sheer force of will. That story doesn't need 500 Templars. It doesn't need inflated numbers. It needs to be told accurately. Because the boy who couldn't feel his own hands, who knew he was dying, who had every excuse to hide behind walls and wait for death, chose instead to ride out and fight. And on one impossible afternoon in November 1177, he won. The Battle of Montgisard remains one of the most remarkable victories in medieval warfare, not because of miracles, not because of Templar mysticism, but because it demonstrates something fundamental about combat. Cohesion beats chaos, concentration beats dispersion, intelligence beats overconfidence, and sometimes a dying boy with nothing to lose is more dangerous than an emperor with everything to protect. The 80 Templars delivered a devastating charge. Grandmaster Odo de Saint-Amand led them with skill and courage. They were crucial to the victory, but the strategic decisions belonged to Baldwin, the terrain selection, the timing, the inspirational leadership that transformed fear into fury. He deserves the credit history gave to the Templars, and maybe, 800 years later, we can finally give it to him. The next time you see a video titled 500 Templars Crush 26,000, remember the real numbers. Remember the real hero. Remember the leper king who rode to war with bandaged hands and won anyway. Because that's the story worth telling. If this deep dive into one of history's most misunderstood battles changed how you see the Crusades, hit that subscribe button. We're myth-busting medieval history one video at a time. And next week, we're tackling another legend that the sources don't support. Thanks for watching.